Hello, I am Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and in this week's Sunday Sit Down video, I'm going to do a topic that I already thought I talked about, but I can't find it on my video stream on YouTube. So, it's my top 10 favorite deck building and bag building games. This is a genre of game that's been around since Dominion and arguably before that, but I think Dominion was the first game to really feature this idea of having players obtain elements of the game, cards, tokens, dice, meeples, things like that. Put them in a random pool, randomly select from that pool, or randomly gain something from that pool, and then have that process cycle. I think that's the key here. This isn't deck construction. This isn't pulling cards from a deck. This is a cycling of a deck that you are building, or a deck that's evolving over time, whether that's cards or a bag of tokens, or in some cases, dice. I have one example that involves dice. I do have a design discussion that I'm going to talk about at the end of the video in terms of what I think about myself designing a deck building or bag building game, and some of the things I love and some of the issues that I have with the genre. But I'm going to jump right into the top 10 list. Actually, let me mention honorable mentions first. You won't see these games appear on the list, but these are games that I really admire in terms of what they added to the genre. They are Great Western Trail, Super Motherload, Aeon's End Legacy, The Quest for El Dorado, and one that I haven't played but that's been highly recommended to me is Slay the Spire, which is a digital deck building game. So I'm curious if you actually have a digital deck building game recommendation, or if you like Slay the Spire, but I haven't played it. So number 10 on my list is Dominion with Prosperity. Dominion, as I said, is probably the originator of this genre of games, this core mechanism of games that's seen so many games come out of it. And while I like core Dominion, I really like Dominion Prosperity because it does what Dominion often encourages you to do, which is get a lot of money and then get a lot of points. And Prosperity really embraces that idea, that idea of getting just a lot of stuff and building up to a giant money card or a giant points card. And I find Prosperity very satisfying as a result. So I kind of like that Dominion just embraced the thing that a lot of people do with Dominion, which is, get a lot of money, get a lot of points in Prosperity. That's why it's my number 10. My number 9 favorite deck building game is Eminent Domain. I played this at Geekway to the West this past year, and there's a lot to love about it that isn't necessarily attached to the deck building element, but there are two elements that I think that I really like. One is one of the actions you can take let you select a specific card from an entire deck of cards. I believe there were 3 decks of these cards on the table, and when you went to buy a card, you could just leaf through the entire deck and pick the one you wanted. So it wasn't like a random tableau that was like a card river that was coming out. You could actually just shift through these decks of cards and pick the exact one you want. It also had a really cool follow mechanism in the game where when other players take their actions, you could take a similar action if you have those cards in your hand. And so it was neat to be able to participate even when it wasn't your turn using those cards that you're building into your deck. So I thought that was really cool. That is my number 9 favorite deck building game, Eminent Domain. My number 8 game is Arctic Scavengers. This is another one that I've only played at Geekway. I haven't played outside of Geekway to the West. But I really have had a great time playing Arctic Scavengers. I think the core mechanisms are fairly standard for deck building, but it has this end of round brawl mechanism where if you save certain cards in your hand for the end of the round, you get to then participate in a brawl with other players where you're comparing a certain number on those cards for this kind of dystopian Arctic brawl. And if you win that brawl, then you get a special treasure card, a special reward. So I really like that idea of holding on to a card at the end of a round to be able to use it for a certain thing that interacts with other players. I thought that was really cool. In my number 8 favorite game, Arctic Scavengers. My number 7 favorite deck building game is Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle. This edged out. I mean, this was very close between this and Aeon's End Legacy as a persistent game. These are both campaign games. Aeon's End Legacy has permanent elements. Harry Potter does not. But I really love just how simply Harry Potter started out and built on that simplicity from game to game throughout the campaign. I found that very satisfying. It's a tough game. We played with 4 players. We did end up winning, I believe, Game 7, but it was a fairly difficult game. But I really like how it ramped up difficulty and that complexity over the 7-game process. It's also fairly short, which I thought was nice. Very, very, very quick deck building game. That's my number 7, Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle. My number 6 is the first one that I have to actually show you here on my shelf, and that is Legendary Encounters Alien. This would probably be higher because this is a wonderful, wonderful game. As I've talked about recently, I think in my video about accessibility, it doesn't get to the table all that much because the setup is really, really complicated. It's almost beyond me to figure out how to set up this game, which is unfortunate. But I love the cooperative elements in this game. It's a fully cooperative game. There's some twists that sometimes make it not cooperative, but usually it's cooperative. And there's a mechanism in the game that lets you help other players when it's not your turn. So I really like that it gives you a reason to engage with and just have this element of table talk with other players so that you can help each other throughout the game in Legendary Encounters. It also has a wonderful sense of dread because not only are you obtaining cards, because you can add cards to your deck, but the creatures that you're battling in this kind of horror theme are creeping up on you, and they're face down. So they're creeping up on you face down. You don't know what they are. You can't do anything about them. You can kind of just hear them in the dark. And so it has this moving, shifting card river. And then when the card flips face up, it's almost too late to deal with it. That's the time that you can deal with it. But so you can spend resources to try to flip over those cards to investigate to see what's going on so you can deal with them before they are attacking you. But I really like that sense of dread. It fits the theme perfectly in this game. And that's why Legendary Encounters is my number 6. My number 5 game, this is the only game that I brought with me to New Zealand recently because I thought it would be a great travel game, and it was. Number 5 is Star Realms. Star Realms is a 2-player, it can play more, but it's really focused on 2-player a deck building game where you are trying to reduce your opponent's life to 0. And I thought this was an interesting twist. I mean, that's kind of what Magic does, but Magic isn't a deck builder in the sense of these other games. I really like that you have a specific target that you're aiming for. That you constantly feel like you're making progress. Even from the beginning of the game, you might just be pecking away at 1 life, 2 life at a time. I think it's called life in this game, or health, or something like that. But I like that you had that sense of progress from the very beginning of the game. Star Realms uses the card river that I think Ascension introduced. So there's a random set of cards that come out, and you're adding to that card river. I really like that mechanism as well because you're seeing a big variety of cards. It reduces the setup time by quite a bit compared to a game like Dominion. While there are still a few set cards that you can always buy. But yeah, and I also like the factions in this game. So the different factions, you can see them on the cover here, they interact with each other. So if you play a card with the green faction, and then you play another card that says, if you've played a card with the green faction, get this benefit, then you get to trigger that. There are also bases in this game that I think are really cool. So they're cards that aren't continually cycled throughout your deck. You're putting them out in front of you, and they stay out there until your opponent deals with them. And they often give you an ongoing benefit. Lots of really cool things happening in Star Realms. And I've had a lot of fun with it, both digitally and this paper version. So that's Star Realms, my number 5. My number 4, or getting to the bag building realm here, is Orleans. Orleans captured my imagination the very first time I played it, and I've really, really continued to enjoy plays of it. It's a bag building game where you are drawing people out of the bag and putting them on... it's not worker placement spots because you're not sharing these spots with other players. It's essentially, they're action selection spots on your player mat. And they often give you another worker. And when you get that worker, you get to advance on a track corresponding to that worker. I really like this dual benefit aspect of the game, that you're not only adding something to your tableau, but you're also gaining something right away, or you're improving your engine in some way. Like one of the workers, the military worker, the soldier, adds to your bag, but also moves you up a track that corresponds with the number of tokens that you can draw from your bag every turn. I also really like the simultaneous play in Orleans. I really like that you can, when you're doing the bag phase, everyone's doing it at the same time, which I really, really love. That also happens in Quacks. You're doing that simultaneously with other players. So it really speeds up the game, or speeds up parts of the game that could have been slow if you're just waiting for each player to take their turn. Really like that. The other element about bag building that I really well, actually, I'll talk about that in the design discussion. There's something about bag building that I think is really cool compared to deck building, but I'll wait a second to get to that. What's next? So that's number 4, Orleans. My number 3 is Dice Forge. This is one that I contemplated not putting on the list, but it does fit the requirements of what I've defined a deck building game or a pool building game as, because you're choosing specific elements to add to your pool, and then you're randomly gaining those elements and cycling them. The cycle of them is maybe the one part that doesn't quite fit with Dice Forge, but I'm going to say it works. Because in Dice Forge, you are building dice. You're adding these little plastic pieces to dice, and then you're rolling those dice. So I really like that. I mean, that itself is its own core mechanism and component that's really, really awesome. But I also really love in Dice Forge that you are rolling your dice on every turn. It's not just your turn that you're rolling the dice. It's only on your turn that you are actually buying stuff, but you're rolling your dice and gaining resources and points and money, even when it's not your turn. You're doing that every turn. I really love that element of Dice Forge, and it really elevates the game for me. So I'm kind of seeing a common thread here on 3 of my top 4, that they are games with some sort of simultaneous benefit, things that you're doing either when it's not your turn or on every turn. My number 2 is in that same vein, and that is the Quacks of Quedlinburg. This is also a bag building game where you're pulling pieces of potions out of a bag and pushing your luck and trying to figure out how far you can go in stirring up your potion for that round. It's simultaneous. You're all drawing out of the bag simultaneously. And you're building your engine by adding these tokens to the bag. Often the tokens give you benefits when you actually place them on the mat. They give you like an immediate benefit. Some of them have end of round benefits. And I really like in Quacks, I thought this was really, really cool. I really like that what the tokens mean change from game to game. So you have these big tiles that you put on the board that say, okay, this game, the yellow token means this. This is what the yellow token means. And so it gives you a lot of variability in the game because they're using the same little tokens without any language on them. They're just language independent tokens, just a little icon, a little bit of art. But every game you have the flexibility of having this language dependent component that changes the meaning of those tokens every game. I think that was really, really clever to do in Quacks of Quedlinburg. And I also love the push your luck element. That brings me to my number 1 game, which I do own. I've mentioned it many times on this channel. My number 1 deck building game is Clank. I'm about to actually start Clank Legacy very soon, but I love Clank. Clank uses the card river like in Ascension. But the main thing that I really love about Clank is that you are moving around on a board. So you're not just building a deck. You are using that deck to move a character around on a board itself. So one of the main things that show up on your cards are little feet, and they show you how far you can move that turn on this map. I love that these maps can change. I have 2 of them. They're both double-sided, and I've played the Pyramid one as well. But I love there's not just a sense of progression in terms of your deck in this game, but there's also a sense of progression as you delve deeper into the dungeons because you're gathering cooler stuff the deeper you go. You're kind of forming a unique path every time you play this. So I really, really like that about Clank. That's why it's my number 1. So the design discussion I wanted to have at the end here is in regards to why I love this genre but haven't designed a deck building game yet, or things that I've considered when thinking about designing a deck building game. The first is cards versus dice or tokens. Dice I'll set aside a little bit because I think dice add maybe a little bit too much randomness. Even though I love custom dice, it seems to me that if I want to make dice work in a deck building game, you would need to randomly be pulling those dice out of a bag, so there's one random element, and then you're rolling the dice, so there's a second random element. I know there are some dice games, I think Quarriors and Dice Masters do that a little bit differently. You're not randomly drawing the dice, but I think that's a pretty key element of the deck building, pool building element. I guess maybe you could just gather the dice and just roll them every turn, but that doesn't really seem to fit into this genre, in my opinion. So looking at bag building, the nice thing about bag building is you can you don't have to shuffle. I mean, that's the main thing with bags. It's very easy to just kind of shake up your bag and shake up those tokens. Whereas with cards, you're constantly shuffling. So I'm at the point where I think if I ever design a deck building game with cards, I think I would feel like I would have to include sleeves in the game itself, just to make that shuffling a lot easier. It's a lot easier to shuffle sleeved cards. So that's one of the big things or one of the big pros about having the bag. One of the cons about having the bag, though, are you have a lot less opportunities to add flavor and theme and variation to the different tokens. Like I said, Quacks does it in a pretty cool way, because it changes up the meaning of the tokens for all players each game, but you don't really have that same. I don't know. There's just not nearly as much variation. Compare the number of different cards in Clank to the number of different abilities in Quacks, and Clank has just so many more abilities in it. So that's a tough one for me to consider there, when thinking about bag building versus deck building with cards. There's also okay, so a few other things that I've thought about here. One is this is a genre that is very well populated, and so I am hesitant to design a game with that theme, given that there's so many games that already exist in it. I know it's familiar. It's nice for people to say, okay, I know that I like deck building games. I'll consider this game, but I'm just a little hesitant to design a game where that mechanism has been used so often in other games. Yeah, so that's one thing. The other big thing for me is I don't always quite understand how the thematic connection between the cycling element and the theme. I put this aside because I love this genre so much, but like in Clank, why is movement a random element that's coming up from time to time? And I'm saying this about my number one favorite deck building game. That just doesn't make as much sense. In Orleans, I think it does make sense, because it kind of makes sense that you're sending these workers out to the world and they're coming back to you at different times. They're showing up for work at different times, basically. That thematically I can understand. But if you have like abilities or weapons or treasures, why are they coming up randomly at different times? It seems like if I acquire a weapon, say I acquire a weapon in a game, or a tool, let's say a tool, I'm going to put that into my little tool belt, and whenever I need it, I'm going to pull it out of my tool belt. It's not like it's randomly going to pop up from time to time. So I struggle with that a little bit. I think it works with people, because people can show up at random times because they have minds of their own. But and I guess maybe with the ships in Star Realms, you're sending them out on missions to do something and they come back at different times. That kind of makes sense. But when I'm looking at individual characters, it doesn't make as much sense. And I'd love for you to contradict me on this. I'd love for you to give me a great thematic explanation of why things will pop up randomly if I'm a character in a game, in a deck building game, that is holding stuff, that I'm gathering stuff and I'm holding that stuff. Why is that stuff popping up randomly? I'd love to hear about that. I'd love to hear a thematic explanation for that in the comments below. And the last thing is cooperative versus competitive. Let me look at my list here. I see 1, 2, I guess there aren't that many. Yeah, I thought there would be more cooperative. I think this genre works pretty well cooperatively and competitively, which is nice. That's a mechanism that really works with both of them. And there are a number of games that work with either one. I'm seeing like maybe 3 or 4 on my list, if I include Aeons and Legacy as cooperative games, and the others are competitive. But I think it works well with both. And actually, mentioning Orleans has a wonderful cooperative expansion called Invasion that is arguably better than the base game. I think it depends on how you feel there. I've had a lot of fun with both. So it kind of shows that you can take this competitive game that has this certain mechanism and convert it into a cooperative game if you do a really great design, as Orleans Invasion is. Yeah, I think those are my main design thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the overall design of deck building games. Maybe your top 3 deck building or bag building or pool building games. What you think about what I said about dice, about the theme. I'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.